Where would you say there's no place for a child? How about adult prison? Up next, public opinion about direct file and why it may hurt more than help our children and our future. The Aware Show starts right now.
This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dee Dee Sharp, and welcome to this special edition of The Aware Show. We're glad to have you right there with us. Well, the state of Florida prosecutes more children in adult court than any other state. And if you think that's alarming, here's some more facts for you. According to the Department of Juvenile Justice, since 2009, more than 15,000 children in Florida, some as young as 10 years old, have been prosecuted as an adult and incarcerated in adult prisons, not juvenile detention facilities, as you may think. Many of these children were even charged with nonviolent crimes that landed them there. And here's the kicker. Even with Florida leading the nation as having the highest number of children prosecuted as adults, Escambia County stands out even more. In 2015, we ranked third in the state for both the number and percentage of children transferred to adult court. By 2016, the numbers climbed even higher, with Escambia County taking the lead for prosecuting children as adults. Well, tonight on The Aware Show, we examine issues surrounding direct file and its correlation to the school-to-prison pipeline. My guests tonight are part of a coalition made up of several organizations known as No Place for a Child. They're working together to drive legislation that would require fitness hearings. That is, have a judge, not a prosecutor, decide if a child should be prosecuted as an adult. Joining me in the studio for this discussion are some of the members of the coalition. That includes Paula Montgomery, a physician and a representative with the League of Women Voters of the Pensacola Bay Area. We have attorney Scott McCoy, senior policy counsel for the Southern Poverty Law Center. Next, Jerry Mcintosh, president of Movement for Change and host of Our Voices, a live stream internet talk show. Reverend Dr. Rick Branch, minister of music, First United Methodist Church, and a member of the Escambia County Youth Justice Coalition. And last but certainly not least, we have someone dear to our hearts, Ann Williams, a mother and advocate of No Place for a Child. She'll share her own compelling story of how direct file has impacted her. We have a lot of ground to cover. I want to thank each and every last one of you for being here. We're just going to jump right in here. Starting with you, Scott, talking about direct file. What is it? What's this process all about?
Right. Thanks. I think that's a great place to start because knowing our terms is where we have to start. Direct file refers to the process by which a prosecutor can file charges against a juvenile that commits a felony in the state of Florida. So we have two systems in the state of Florida. We have a juvenile justice system and we have an adult criminal justice system. The default for juveniles, individuals that are under 18 years of age, is that if they commit a felony or a crime, they are dealt with in the juvenile justice system. But Florida law allows and gives power to prosecutors in a certain number of cases to take that child out of the juvenile system and put them into the adult system and prosecute them as if they're an adult rather than as a child. And so when we say direct file, that's basically what we're talking about. That's the decision, the unilateral decision by a prosecutor to take a child who's committed a felony and try them as an adult in the adult court rather than dealing with them in the juvenile court. So when we say direct file, that's what we're talking about.
Take us through that process. Child has committed a criminal offense, one of the, 19, is it, that they could commit. That has happened. Take us through the process of direct file.
Yeah, we actually have two categories. So for 14 and 15-year-olds, the statute says that there are 19 different types of felonies that qualify that 14 or 15-year-old to be prosecuted as an adult. And remember, a 14-year-old can be as young as an 8th grader. So thinking about the age of these children, we're talking about 8th graders in some cases, or freshmen, in high school. Those 14, if you commit a particular one of those offenses, that can allow the prosecutor to drag you into adult court. For 16 and 17-year-old kids, it's any felony whatsoever can qualify you for being prosecuted as an adult. So let's say you have a 14-year-old that commits the burglary of someone's garden shed, right? The prosecutor can look at that case and decide that he or she wants to prosecute that kid as a child rather than having them dealt with in the juvenile justice system. The juvenile justice system is designed to deal with kids, to rehabilitate them, and to get them back on the right path. Unfortunately, the adult system, the competing system, is not. It is not at all designed to deal with children, and in fact, it fails miserably when it is faced with having to deal with children. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about kids that, yes, who have made a mistake, they've committed a felony, but really the crux of the issue is how do we hold them accountable? Do we hold them accountable in the juvenile justice system, or do we hold them accountable in the adult court system? And in our opinion, in the vast, vast majority of cases, it makes much more sense from a public safety, from a taxpayer sense, to keep them in the juvenile justice system that's designed, at least, and intended to rehabilitate them, hold them accountable, and get them back on the right track.
Another big issue involving all of this is the power of the prosecutor in all of this. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Prosecutors are the ones in our system that do make decisions about whether or not you hold someone accountable for a crime, and that's fine. But kids are different. Florida is an outlier in terms of the power that it gives to prosecutors to unilaterally, without any input from a judge or from the Department of Juvenile Justice or anything else, but unilaterally unfettered decision whether or not to prosecute as an adult. There are only 3 other jurisdictions that allow that: Louisiana, Michigan, and the District of Columbia. So Florida is an outlier in the amount of power, and quite frankly, unchecked power, that we afford our state attorneys to prosecute children as adults. And that is a really serious thing, and I think it's why. I think the fact that power has been given to them is the exact reason why Florida leads the nation in the number of children that are prosecuted as an adults. Because the state attorneys have that power, they use it. And last year, 1,101 kids were taken from the juvenile justice system and prosecuted as an adults. And that's more than California, it's more than Texas, and think about the populations of those states. Yes, Florida is the 3rd largest state, but even compared to those even much greater populations, we are still sending more of our children into the adult system than anywhere else in the country.
And there are some big implications with that, and we're going to be discussing that here on the Aware Show tonight. Of course, I want to go to you, Rick, because your organization, the Escambia Youth Justice Coalition, has been working to bring in the Southern Poverty Law Center and attorneys like Scott, and just kind of educate the community, if you will, about the seriousness of direct file. Tell us more about what you all are doing and why.
Yes, we've had several community events over the years. The Youth Justice Coalition got started somewhere around 2011, 2012, when just a lot of people in the community became aware of the direct file issue and also the school issues with so many arrests happening in our schools and other things that we were just very uncomfortable with. So a lot of folks from churches and businesses and individuals all came together, and with the help of the Southern Poverty Law Center, we formed the Escambia Youth Justice Coalition, and we have been working ever since then to try and reduce the amount of direct file that happens, especially in Escambia County, because Florida is the worst state for doing that, and Escambia County is the worst county for doing that. In Florida, out of every youth who is arrested, 1 out of 50 in Florida are tried as an adult, but in Escambia County, it's 1 out of every 20.
Wow.
So it is significantly more in our area, and we just want to try and do something different to help our kids and help the community.
Okay. And of course, you, Paula, with the League of Women Voters and a retired physician, I mean, you understand probably a little bit more of the psyche maybe involved with children and or, you know, how the impact of direct file has on them with that, as well as what you do with the League of Women Voters to try to bring awareness to this issue. Tell us more.
Oh, the League of Women Voters really wants every child to have all the opportunity they can possibly get. They want them educated, they want them to become good citizens, and they want our communities to be safe at the same time. A child does not have a fully developed brain with all the capacity that they need to make good judgments and to resist peer pressure and all of that would go with being a good adult. They don't have all of that until they're about 25 years old. At the same time, a child, while they're developing, is more amenable to rehabilitation and to be given good chances, learn more, and to shape their life up and turn it around. And if we give children that opportunity, then we make our community safer because those children will then become productive citizens. That's the hope. Mm-hmm. And rather than coming back into the prison over and over again, or having children of their own that they don't know how to take care of.
Mm-hmm. I know when I was 14, 15, 16 years old, I'm just glad that I wasn't, you know, accountable to some of the things that I may have done that may not have been, you know, systematically correct, whatever that I did or didn't know, intentionally, unintentionally.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that's also important to consider about that very fact is our entire legal system already, in practically every other context, appreciates that children are different. We don't allow children to vote. We don't allow children to enter into contracts. We don't allow children to marry. We don't allow children to serve in the military. There's so many things that we don't allow them to do because we acknowledge and we understand that they are different. They are different. They are different in maturity, in brain development, in all of those things that Paula just mentioned. And but for some reason, when they make a mistake and they break the law, all of a sudden we forget that they're different. And we say, well, you did an adult thing and we're going to punish you like an adult. So there's a disconnect on this issue of direct file. Why is it that when it comes to holding them accountable when they make a mistake, you know, we're treating them as adults, whereas in every other context we're saying, no, you deserve a special circumstance?
Yeah, you're too big for this, but you're not small enough for that. Right. Jerry, I want to get you in here and just tell us a little bit about Movement for Change, and then I want to move to what opponents of direct file have to say about all of this, because we want to hear the other side as well. Jerry, tell us what you all are doing with Movement for Change.
We're working with the coalition, as a matter of fact, to make sure that what is taking place stops, and that's the direct file and putting children in adult jail. And I know some of the things that happen to children are very graphic. That, you know, and so we're talking about rape and all the other things that go along with children being put in adult prison. Instead of doing some psychological evaluation of those children, what made them come to the point where these things happen or they committed some kind of crime. But more than that, I think the jail and the prison system was supposed to be about rehabilitation and not so punitive that, of course, we want children to, you know, have some consequences if they do something wrong. But by the same token, we want that consequence to match the crime that they committed. And that means now that that child need counseling, and they need to be represented by a good counsel, lawyers, and all of that. And I know that they're saying that, oh yeah, you get a public defender and all of that, but they are bogged down in cases, and so the child never get a chance to really see a lawyer, even sometime when they are paid attorneys to deal with these cases. They're sometimes not looked at the case well enough to do justification for that child. And I hope that in the future that we look at the laws and legislation to change those kinds of incidents where our children can be rehabilitated. And then there are adults that can be rehabilitated. So the whole system of the prison industrial complex need to be reordered and looked at and see how we can best change that. And then, as we was talking about in the green room back there, at the height of the crack epidemic, too much power was given to individuals in the hands of state's attorneys and all of that to charge, give unchecked power, and that power has to be brought into commissary with what the system should demand of, and that should be the judges should be the one to eke out justice to our children.
I can appreciate in your response, Jerry, that you kind of gave some of the insights into how the opponents of No Place for a Child approach this. And so what we'll do is we'll just kind of flesh that out just a second here, because someone against this would say if they did the crime, they got to do the time. And so I just want to hear, we'll just do 1 or 2, 3 of those, and I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that type of response to what you're saying. So how do we feel about that?
Well,
You do the crime, you do the time.
The way I would respond to that one is the whole juvenile justice system is about rehabilitation. And so if we only want to punish, what we're saying is this 10-year-old, this 12-year-old, 14-year-old, we have no hope that you will ever be a better person. And we've decided that you're not going to. So let's just punish you. Do the crime, do the time. We're not saying that they shouldn't, there shouldn't be things that they need to do to pay for the crime that they did. But through the juvenile system, they can also receive the counseling and many other community services that are available right here in Pensacola to help the youth who are going through the juvenile system. And I just think it's not right to say to so many of these children, there is no hope for you.
What about trying to do it by having a judge look at these cases instead of the prosecutor doing a direct file, that you could end up bogging down the court system? That's another comment that's made by people who oppose No Place for a Child.
But then that's
Jerry?
what the justice system is for. If it get bogged down, okay. But the system is supposed to eke out justice. I mean, regardless of what the crime was, you know, each person is supposed to be dealt with in a just manner. And so if they are not done, if it's not done that way, if people are just saying, okay, I want you to plead no contest, I want you to plead to something that's less than what you have committed the crime for. And but the thing about it, the crime, they may not have even committed a crime, or the crime may be something as little as a misdemeanor. But the thing about it now, they are going into adult court, and that's the sad part about it.
And I would add, you know, if you're worried about clogging the adult court system, then don't prosecute these kids in the adult court system, right? The easiest way to take 1,001 cases out of the adult court system is to get rid of direct file, because that means that those cases would stay in the juvenile court system, the juvenile justice system, where there's a delinquency process with a juvenile court judge. The other thing is I find it hard to believe that prosecutors can't and PDs can't handle doing fitness hearings or going in front of a judge and asking whether or not this kid should really be in adult court, 1,000 times a year is really going to clog the court system. And even if you accept that it would in some way maybe add a burden to the courts, I can't think of a better set of people that we should burden the courts with taking a closer look at whether or not we literally make a life or death decision about whether or not they stay in adult court or whether or not they go into juvenile court, because that's the decision that's making. If a kid stays in the adult court, then they are going to be burdened for life with a felony conviction and all of the negative consequences that come with that, and they're actually more likely to reoffend if they go into the adult system than if they stay in the juvenile court system. So if the cost of getting that decision right is making the courts and the state attorneys do a little more work, I'm pretty okay with that.
Now, you mentioned a term there that I think we need to kind of just go and unpack right quick. You mentioned fitness hearings.
Right.
Explicate that for us.
Right. So one of the problems with the current system is that when the state attorney makes the decision by him or herself to transfer that kid into the adult court system, there is no involvement with the judge whatsoever. That's actually a misconception. I think a lot of people in the public assume that that decision involves a judge. In Florida, it does not. So right now, the kid gets into adult court. One of the reforms that the No Place for a Child Coalition is proposing is that once that kid gets into adult court, the kid and the attorney and his or her attorney should be able to go to the adult court judge and say, please review my case, and I don't think I should be in adult court. Send me back to juvenile court. And so we call that a fitness hearing. Is the child fit to be tried as an adult? Right now, that doesn't exist. That process doesn't exist. If once in adult court, you're always in adult court. There's no. It's not a revolving door. It's a one-way door. So once the prosecutor pushes you through that door, no way back in. So one of the reforms that we're proposing is that fitness hearing, and that is involve a judge, allow the judge to look at the facts and the circumstances and the kid's life and his family and his history, and make a real decision about whether or not, yes, you did something really bad, you got to be in adult court, or no, I think you would be better dealt with in juvenile court. Okay. That's a common sense reform that we are pushing and we would like to see done.
I think another misconception is that the state attorneys are doing something like that. And actually, though, we have no idea. They don't have to answer to anyone. They simply direct file. They fill that out. And that child goes to adult court, and there is absolutely nothing that can be done at that point to bring the child back. So it's okay that someone makes a decision, that someone says, should this child be treated as an adult or as a juvenile? We're just saying it should be a judge that does that, and it should be in a hearing, in an open setting, and not the state attorney who can do it and never have to justify to anyone why they did it.
Okay, now I've had you sit there kind of and just take a listen and allow us to just kind of make our viewers aware of what we're talking about. But we're going to bring this home with your own compelling story of what has happened to you and your family. Share it with us here on The Aware Show.
Well, my son at age 14, 8th grade, had not even hit puberty yet, was a week away from having his braces put on, very young and very vulnerable, as all of these children are. They're vulnerable. They are a vulnerable population. He was prescribed a medication and shot and killed his father, and immediately was taken away. I was at a PTA meeting for an hour. So he was direct filed. I was beside myself. I had no idea what direct file meant. I was thrown into a legal system. I've been a nurse for 38 years. I understand medicine. I don't understand the law. My son certainly did not understand the law at age 14. There are things that I am still learning 8 years after this happened about the law, about the legal speak. But I do know this. I was immediately removed from the situation. My son was now treated as an adult. That meant that I no longer had any place anywhere near him. Once I hired the attorneys, I no longer was their client. My son became their client. He was the one who had to deal alone with the attorneys. Most people don't understand this. Most people, it was so shocking to me to be caught up in such a travesty and dealing with so many horrific things. And I have attorneys telling me, you can't talk to your son anymore. You're not part of this. And I don't know how to explain to people, because people don't know. People just do not understand. I'm repeating myself because it was such a horrific scene.
Traumatic, I can imagine.
It was very
you lost
traumatic.
Your husband, and now you can't even talk to your son.
But not only that, I can't be there for any of the legal discussions.
Right.
Why this happened, what's going to happen to you. And when they finally offered a plea deal, they went to him. And he's 15 at that point. He'd been sitting in the Escambia County jail. And the things that were said to him, he was, by the attorneys who were hired to defend him, if you don't sign this, you're going to prison for life. the things that take place, people would not believe. We cannot treat our children as adults because they are not adults. They cannot think as adults. They cannot process as adults. And certainly the parents can barely do it, especially when we're in a system that we don't understand. So children have to have their parents there, and if they don't have a parent, they need to have someone representing them. We can't take a child and treat them as an adult. That's all there is to it. It's insanity. As my mother says, it's inhumane what has happened to our little boy.
How much longer does he have? We're talking about 2018 this year. How much more time does he have?
Warren is 22.
Okay.
He has 12 more years. He was sentenced to 20.5 years. And that was with a lot of wrangling and haranguing of our attorneys and trying to get other people involved. It was a very, I talked about unusual circumstances. 10,000 children in a 5-year span were sentenced as adults in the state of Florida. These are good kids that should be given the opportunity for education, should be given the opportunity to be rehabilitated, if they even need to be rehabilitated. Every one of us sitting here and everyone watching tonight have made mistakes. That's what children are doing. Sometimes they're not making good decisions and they're making mistakes that they will pay for a lifetime. So it's something that all of us need to understand the process a little bit more. We just need to keep children within the juvenile system. We're not saying take the worst of the worst. They can be handled, but most children are not bad children. That is a misnomer here in Escambia County. They seem to think Escambia County children are bad children. Children are children everywhere.
That was going to be one of my questions. Is it that our children are so bad, or is it that our system just isn't working? I mean, because our numbers are very high here in the state and in our area. And I'll get to that, but right now my heart just goes out to you being a mom. And that's why I was saying in our open of this show that, you know, you're dear to us because you've come and you wanted to share your story with us doing this program. And we appreciate you for being brave and coming and doing this and putting a face on Direct Filed. And I want to ask you now, how is Warren? How's he doing?
He's doing beautifully under the circumstances for what he has had to endure. And he's had a lot of support. Rick goes to visit him, and he has a lot of people who love and have embraced him and have raised him within the prison system. He's had a lot of support from our family. Scott talked about the child and the attorney going to the judge for a fitness hearing. We were not allowed to do any of that. All of the grandparents on both sides of the family, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of us wanted to have input. And we were not allowed to speak. No one wanted to hear what we had to say about this child. And I think that was unfair to my child, my son.
And who would know him best?
And it is unfair to children across the state of Florida.
You've had an opportunity to visit Warren. Tell us about the demeanor and how what you see and what you know about all of this.
He is genuinely one of the most impressive kids I've ever known. I really can't say enough about how kind he is, how he's so incredibly smart. When I go to visit, you usually get to stay for about 2 or 3 hours, and he is just picking my brain for any information, and I'm trying to pick his. He won an award, I think it was in 2014, for the person in the state. The Department of Juvenile Justice gave an award for someone who mentored youth in juvenile prisons. And Warren won the award for the whole state because of the mentoring that he was doing. He genuinely has a care and concern for other people. And he's an incredible person.
I've had an opportunity to talk to you in both of your roles that you play as pastor and also as someone involved with your coalition for our youth. And I know you have, I think they're similar in your fight and your wanting to be involved with this for our children. But I thought it was really interesting about your pastoral role and how you feel about all of this. Share that with us.
I believe in a God of second chances. It is all throughout the Bible. The experience that I've had and that so many have had is that God does not condemn us on the first mistake. God gives us second chances and many more. And I think anytime we take a child and say, we're going to send you to the adult system, which does not do rehabilitation, only does punitive. Anytime we take a child and do that, we are saying there is no more second chances for you. We have decided that you are not redeemable. And I think it's personally a sin for us to make that judgment on children.
Thank you for sharing that. Jerry?
I was going to say one of the things that when she was talking about her son, she said he took something medicine or something, and it caused him to do what he did. And that's why I say children should be psychologically evaluated before they even go into the courts. They should be dealt with that way. And the parents should have input into that. Anytime that you get lawyers and you pay for lawyers and you don't have a hand into your child's well-being because someone decided, well, you can't be a part of this because of the way the justice system have adjudicated that child. That is dangerous for anybody, because I know how I would feel if it was my child, and that's anybody's child. And that's why we are fighting to make sure that this kind of legislation is changed so that people won't have to deal with this again, because it's dangerous for anybody.
Yeah, go ahead,
I was
Scott.
just saying, that's exactly, this circumstance demonstrates again why a fitness hearing makes so much sense, right? The evidence about what happened to him and about what drug he took and how it interacted with him, how it affected him psychologically, how it might have made him do what he did, never made it to a judge, never made it to a jury. And one has to wonder, if a fitness hearing had been in existence, had that been an option, then maybe that judge would have been able to evaluate that evidence, that argument, and make a decision about the very course of his life. Unfortunately, so many of our cases resolve without a trial, and 98% of them resolve in plea deals. And so, his attorneys told him, when presented with a plea, it's like you take the plea and it's 20 years, or you roll the dice and go to trial and you could end up with life. It's not an irrational decision to take the plea. So unfortunately, the system is set up so that evidence never got evaluated. A fitness hearing would allow that to take place, at least.
And this is a really bizarre scenario, but my son was offered a first plea deal, and he was forced to sign it. He signed it, and he called me later and he said, "Mom, I didn't want to sign it." And I said, "Do you want to go to trial?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, that's why I paid them." So they went back, and on a Sunday, the day before the trial, they took another plea deal, and when they closed that door, they made him sign it, and they said, "Don't go crying to mommy next time." That doesn't happen in adult court to adults. It happens to children in adult courts.
That's pretty amazing there. So, Scott, I'm going to come back to you right quick on a question I asked a little earlier. Is it that our children are that bad? Or what is it that makes our numbers so high here in Florida and in Escambia County?
Yeah, I frankly find it a little offensive if anyone suggests that the children in Escambia County in Northwest Florida are somehow worse, more bad, however you want to say it, crime prone than the kids down in Miami-Dade or the kids over in Jacksonville. I just think that's ridiculous. I think the difference is I think the attitude of the people making the decisions, the internal kind of philosophies, and in some respects we haven't talked about it yet, but the racial biases that exist, whether or not they are kind of overt or if they are more inherent or under the surface. I think it's a mistake to blame the kids. The people that are making these decisions are adults. That finger, I think, should be pointed at the adults, not at the children. I don't think it's the bad kids. I mean, sure, kids are making mistakes in Northwest Florida just like they are in South Florida. But what we're talking about is how do we respond to those mistakes? And I think the adults in Northwest Florida are responding to those mistakes badly or poorly, and we could do it differently. And unfortunately, the system is set up that it allows those adults enough power to unfortunately do some I think misguided things when they are evaluating what to do with those kids who do make mistakes.
Several years ago, I was in a room with the people who get to make those decisions. There was a juvenile judge, there was a representative of the state attorney, and a lot of other folks in the room, and I showed the judge a graph that showed how much more our children are sent to adult prisons than children in other counties. And the judge, he was genuinely surprised, and he said, are we doing something wrong, or are our kids just that bad? And the person who represented the state attorney, who is on the front line of deciding who gets direct filed and who doesn't, that person tried to leave the room at that point without saying anything, but they got to the door and couldn't do it. And they turned around and they said, yes, our children in Escambia County really are that bad. And that's the person who is saying this child should be direct filed. And I don't think I think that's a big problem why Escambia County is number one.
Well, American society is reevaluating everything that we do now. We know that it is not economically stable it's not viable for us to keep the prison system going. So let's take our most vulnerable population, put them back where they belong, which is in juvenile systems. If they end up in an adult system once they become an adult, then that is the way it is. But that is the way the system is designed. So let's get back to the way it was designed.
And Paula, I know that with the League of Women Voters, you all stand for justice and you want the balance. And I love something that you said earlier in the green room. You said you want what's best for the most people. And with children, you want, of course, what's best. And what you all feel is direct file is not necessarily not the best at all.
It is certainly not the best.
Okay.
And it is not the best for the child, it's not the best for the family, and it is not best for the community to be doing this to our children. We are losing people into the system who could become productive citizens, who could pay taxes, who could, pull their own weight, and we're just losing them by throwing them in a black hole where they don't come out again, or don't come out whole anyway.
Let's talk about, just quickly here, some of the things Jerry mentioned just graphic. You don't want to think about putting a child with an adult and what happens to them, what can happen to them in prison and that sort of thing. But other things happen as well. You are pretty much branding them.
Yes, and there have been several studies done, and depending on which study you look at, anywhere a child that gets placed in an adult prison is anywhere from 7.7 times more likely to commit suicide, all the way up to 36 times more likely to commit suicide than a child who's in the juvenile system. And that right there means we as a society are killing our children. I mean, we are putting them in a situation that they absolutely cannot cope with. And even the lower number of 7.7 is way too high for it being our children who are killing themselves because we as a society have failed them.
And so when we brand them, and this happens to them, then housing becomes, when they do come out, then housing is an issue, and getting back into society and not being able to vote, and other things are impacted in their lives down the road, lifelong implications of direct file.
Right, and it's amazing to think about it. Like, think about a 14-year-old who's direct filed, and the 14-year-old pleads guilty and has an adult felony. So that 14-year-old is deprived of the right to vote 4 years before he was ever even eligible to vote in the first place, right? But that deprivation lasts for the rest of his or her life. You can't serve in the military. You no longer become eligible if you have a felony for certain federal educational aid. You have to check the box on every job application you make for the rest of your life that you are a felon. And housing becomes, more difficult. So we are automatically putting on a 14, 15, 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid a lifelong impediment that literally will make it much, much harder for him or her to succeed through their entire life. And it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense from a taxpayer perspective, because with those burdens, those individuals will be more likely to have to access social services, which are paid for by all of us as taxpayers. They are more likely to reoffend, which means that they will be back into the adult prison system, which costs $20,000 a year for all of us to pay to incarcerate someone in the adult system. All of these things compound. It affects their education, and not getting a high school diploma decreases your earning potential over your lifetime by hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a burden for that person's self and family, but also it's tax revenue that's forgone by the state. So all of these things compound, and all because we insist on punishing this kid in the adult system versus the juvenile justice system, which we have and fund and have created to rehabilitate.
And I know that there's some people watching who are saying, well, these kids surely are the worst of the worst, and they surely deserve these adult sanctions. But more than 50% of the children that we direct file are for nonviolent crimes. And about, I think, help me with this, I think it's about 70% of those, once they go, when they're filed as an adult, and they go and they have their trial, the judge, 70% of all of those children, the judge will say, I'm going to give you probation. Which makes it sound like, oh well, they're not having to go to jail, and that's not as bad. But that means that the probation doesn't give that child any of the many community services that are available if that child had stayed in the juvenile justice system.
And they still get the felony.
And they still get the
felony.
felony.
They get the felony, and they get adult probation, which begs the question: if you were such a bad kid and did such a bad thing that all the judge thought you deserved was adult probation, why did we put you through the adult system in the first place? Why did we saddle you with a felony conviction? Why didn't we just keep you in the juvenile court system?
Believe it or not, there are counties in the state of Florida who have implemented art programs, and the judge reviews the child who could be sentenced as an adult in Escambia County, and these children are in art programs, their parents agree to counseling, and these children do beautifully, and they go on to be contributing citizens, as the League of Women Voters is hoping that Escambia County children could be. But if we don't allow them the opportunity, it's not going to happen.
I'm just sitting here thinking, just off the cuff, I wouldn't want a child to be educated in an adult prison. Because that for certain can lead to a lot of recidivism with them committing, possibly committing crimes.
They get an education in the adult prison, but not in any subjects that you and I would hope that they would get educated on.
Right. Exactly.
Adult prison turns them into better career criminals, and they don't get educational services in the adult system.
The book of Proverbs says, train a child up in the way he should go, and when he's an adult, he will stay on that path. When we send kids to an adult prison, we are training them up in a way to go. It's just not the way that we ever wanted.
Right. And just being dealing with a lot of families who have young children in adult prison, or young boys, many of them 16, 17, 18 years old, many of them want to continue their education. They have a great desire to do that, but some of these kids are sentenced to 10, 20, 30 years, and the prison system will not even begin to let them do any kind of education until 2 to 3 years before their release. They say, no, you can't be educated. What are you going to do with it? I mean, the treatment inside the prison system, people would find extremely unbelievable.
And just to add a point to all of this, I found in some of my research that a large number of the kids that go into direct file are going because of burglary. And I was really astounded when it was like, burglary, really? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Scott.
I was just going to say, we're talking about education, and I just want to focus this real quick on another aspect of education that is where we're failing miserably. So another thing that people don't understand is when a child is direct filed and the decision is made to prosecute them as an adult, the law says they have to be held pending their trial in the adult county jail. So a kid who is awaiting trial and going through that process can spend months and even years sitting in an adult county jail. While they're sitting in that adult county jail, they are not getting any educational services, or they're getting in some places around the state, they're getting some educational services. In most cases, that educational service is inadequate, and they are legally entitled to receive education while they're waiting. And the education piece is the one thing that is the key to their rehabilitation. And right out of the gate, when they're direct filed, we're denying them those legally required educational requirements.
Jerry?
And I was going to say that, people need to go back and read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow in the Age of Color Blindness. It talks about all of those scenarios where you are permanently discriminated against the rest of your life just because you did something at a young age that you may never do again or may not even think about doing again. But that felony will follow you the rest of your life. It blocks you from, like he was saying earlier, getting jobs and education and housing, college. But the good part about it, at one time, people were getting educated in the prison system because it was about rehabilitation, and that's why I say everything has to be reordered. We need to go back to where they have systems set up where schools are. In the prison system, when they come out, they can become very productive citizens, and that's the thing about it now. We are making sure that people are not being educated, so they're going to end up back in there, and so the prison become prison industrial complex where people are making money off of human beings again.
Jerry, you mentioned Jim Crow. Let's just go right now to the racial disparities with all of this. Let's talk about it. Children of color account for 67% of children arrested in Florida, but 77% of those prosecuted as adults. The numbers are astounding for African Americans than so far with the other, I would say, I don't want to just necessarily say Caucasians, but particularly serious racial disparities.
Absolutely. So, in this area, I think in the Escambia County, or it might be the first judicial circuit which Escambia County is within, something like 32% of the population is African American or people of color. But you look at 67% of the juvenile arrests are people of color, and then about the same percentage, 67, 68% of the juveniles that are direct filed are persons of color. So those numbers are completely out of whack with the population, the African American or the population of people of color in Escambia, and it's not because that population commits more crimes or is more crime prone.
Really?
Right.
No, just kidding.
No, I mean, but unfortunately that, we have to say that, right? So it does beg the question, why is that population twice as likely to be arrested and then direct filed? That is something that we need to take a very, very
big
serious
question
look
mark.
at.
Go.
For about 2 years, I went into the adult jail and did a Friday afternoon Bible study every week with the children who were direct filed. These were the children who were being treated as adults. And it was, Warren was in there for about a year and a half. But if there was another white child in there, it was very rare. And there were, at the highest I ever saw, there was at one point 24 children in there, and 23 of them were children of color. If in Pensacola specifically, if you are a 14 or 15-year-old black boy, you are more than twice as likely to be charged as an adult, to be direct filed by the state attorney, than a 14 or 15-year-old white child in Pensacola for the exact same crimes.
Astounding. I want to turn now to some public opinion about all of this, and we can come back to this. Jerry, if you have a thought or two about the racial disparity, because I know movement for change, you all have been fighting similar causes and this cause for a while now. Let's go to public opinion now. According to a 2017 Right of Crime public opinion poll, 70% of Floridians believe judges, not prosecutors, should decide whether to prosecute a child as an adult. 74% of Floridians believe children charged with crimes should stay in the juvenile justice system and not be transferred to the adult criminal system. My point that I want to make about public opinion is that if overwhelmingly Floridians want to do this, what's going on here? There's a disconnect that it hasn't happened, but I know that you're working to make it happen.
We are trying every year in the legislature, in Tallahassee, we are trying to get laws passed to make it so that a judge makes a decision instead of the state attorney. But our representatives are not representing the statistics that you just said.
Let's talk about the legislation in depth. Let's zoom in and focus on it. Rick, tell us, there is a bill in the House and one in the Senate. They are companions. Tell us a little bit about that. We've got just a few minutes to explain.
So unfortunately, we just wrapped up the 2018 legislative session. It ran from January to March. We had two pieces of legislation, one that was in the House, one in the Senate. They were identical bills, and they did things like that fitness hearing, create that fitness hearing, reduce some of the eligibility for certain crimes for certain sets of kids, a lot of things. It was a package deal. Unfortunately, neither of those bills passed this year, but we did a good job of educating legislators about it. We raised the profile of the issue here in Northwest Florida, and we're going to keep at it. We expect that the No Place for a Child Coalition will continue this advocacy at the legislature in the next session, and our hope is through efforts like all of yours here, that we will continue to build from the grassroots the support we need to finally get something done on this issue.
And this coalition is working because Paula, you knew I was coming. Look, she's got her hand up. Paula's had her hand up. She wants to talk about what's been going on here locally.
Well, what I wanted to say is
excuse me.
that
Go. No, what do you want to say?
What I wanted to say was that I felt like it was my duty to bring this to public notice.
Very good.
And so that's why I started, and the league started having a series of programs and invited people who really know the stuff to come and tell it to the public. And then we contacted the papers and got the papers to publish articles about it.
But you went even further because you also just recently went to your county commission and the city council. And tell us about your success there.
We went to the city council and the county commission with a resolution, a non-binding resolution, which was actually written by Scott's cohort of people. And it stated that children are children, and it stated that we needed a different system for putting them into the adult system if they had to go there. But generally not wanting them there, but if they had to go there, we need to have a judge involved, a judicial hearing of some sort. And there was very little resistance at the city council level. We went around and visited with each of the people in the city council first and got their opinion, and only one person voted against it. The county commission was a totally different story. There was lots of fireworks. There were people.
I saw it.
There were people who, on the county commission who believe that children are evil, and that they do terrible things, and they should be punished, not rehabilitated. They should just be punished. And so the
But
vote.
yet you had success there. The vote.
We did. The vote was 3-2 in our favor. So we were able. We also visited with those people
Very
and talked
good.
to them.
We had parents actually there for other reasons coming up and telling us thank you, that my 16-year-old daughter was almost sentenced as an adult. Thank goodness people got involved and kept that from happening. There are a lot of times that families don't have that help, and it happens so quickly that your head is spinning. You don't understand what is taking place. I had never heard of direct file when that happened to my son. I still didn't know what it meant after it had happened. I had to have the attorneys explain it over and over to me to understand. And day after day, I called them and said, send my child back to juvenile court. That's where he needs to be. And no one said that cannot happen. I think they tried it. Well, now we are going to make it so that it can happen, and we're not going to go away. We've been in Tallahassee year after year after year, and we're not letting this go. It's not one child. It's all children deserve this, and Florida has a bad reputation, and we need to change this.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that the measure of a society is what it does for its children. And I don't think we would have a very good grade in Florida right now because of what we're doing for our children.
We want to share some resource information as you all talk. I want to just take the moment to do that because I want anyone who's listening who may find themselves in a similar situation, God forbid, but thank you so much again for sharing that, your story, and can get information and get connected and get information from each of you to help them to better understand and to be able to vote and know how they need to proceed with all of this. Just some closing thoughts. I'm loving that what you all have done here in the grassroots effort has basically shown our people the importance of the power of voting. And it's certainly, I'm sure, resonated with local leaders, and it will with state leaders as well. Closing thoughts, less than 2 minutes now. Jerry, we'll start with you.
Just that I think, we need to get more and more people involved and engaged, not only in what we're doing here, but throughout the whole political system. The system needs to be reordered, as I said earlier, and people need to be engaged in it and to make sure that things like this do not happen again. We tried to get people engaged years ago when we found out that kind of power was being given to state's attorneys and attorney generals.
Okay.
It's an election year, 2018, November. All of the members of the House of Representatives are up for election, and half of the Senate, the governor, the AG. So if you want to get involved, if you want to make this an issue, which I think we should, and raise the profile of it, the 2018 election is a great place to do that. Everybody is going to have something to vote on in November, and ask the candidates about this.
Good.
And I have great hope, and it's because I hear more and more people understanding the issue and wanting to work for it.
Very good. Closing comment, Ann?
Any families who need help, you can get in touch with Rick or Paula, and I personally will be happy to help you, give you some guidance and send you in the right direction, because a lot of families are out there scrambling and struggling with what to do when they end up in a situation they never imagined possible.
And voting is very important. I hope a lot of us are in line behind students that are motivated by the Parkland students. And I think it's going to be a big wave. And I think doing better for our society can come through that wave.
Okay, very good. That's all the time we have for now. I want to thank my guests for joining us. As always, we thank you as well for being right here while we were able to provide some insight into the many complexities and the challenging issues concerning direct file. Whether you're a proponent or an opponent of direct file, we all can agree upon it. Our children are our future. People opposing direct file are not saying children should not face consequences for committing serious crimes. They're simply saying children pushed into the adult system and branded with felony convictions face lifelong obstacles like what we've been talking about: finding jobs, housing, education, and even employment issues. In some cases, they're more likely to be arrested again, and that's not good for our communities. In fact, we're worse off for it. In the words of Scott McCoy, one of our guests here tonight, our children have a propensity for changing, but not only that is, if we afford them an opportunity to do that. We must enact reforms that provide such opportunity. The adult criminal justice system is simply no place for a child. For more information on this Aware Show and others, we want you to be sure to catch us on youtube.com and at WSRE.org. Until the next time, I'm Dee Dee Sharp saying, stay informed and stay aware.